background. How much does that place you were born in dictate who you are and what you write about today? How important was it for you? And I'll ask Joanna first, to be born in Brasov.
Yes. Well, this time, Rosie, first of all, of course, good evening to everyone, and sorry for being a little bit late. It's not my fault. But to answer to your question, I will not talk this time about Brasov, because I got a message from a reader, and I think it will be interesting to talk about that. And it was something very unexpected for me. She said just a sentence, and this sentence was, "How happy I am," said she, "how happy I am that you were born in Romania." I understood exactly what she meant, because me too, I'm sometimes happy that certain people are born in Romania, and I can talk with them, I can read them, I can meet them, and so on. But then I asked myself, do I think also like that about myself, that I am happy to be born in Romania? After a short but very intense debate, I thought that yes, the answer is yes, I am happy to be born, that I was born in Romania, because it's a country where you have many things to do, to put things in order, and for a writer you have many topics, inspiring topics, and it's not bad to be a Romanian writer, even if you are not so easily translated and so on. But not just that. I thought also that we writers have the same country. We are from the same, I don't know, republic, if you want, or from the same nation, that we speak in a way the same language, even if we have different languages. But I noticed many times that when writers speak to each other, they are in a way as brothers or sisters or relatives. So maybe it's not so important where you were shaped and which was your background, but becoming a writer is probably more important, and in this sense I feel that every writer is somebody I know and some friends.
What a wonderful opening. I mean, thank you, Joanna, for those words. I have nothing more to say. I think that's probably the most fantastic way of starting an event, I think, with two writers who aren't even in the same room.
Joanna, my sister. Hello. Hello.
Isn't that great?
Yeah. For me, it's my background is different from yours, Johanna, in that I moved. I left the country I was born in. So I grew up in Washington, D.C. My father was a photographer for the Washington Post. So this was during the 60s and 70s. He covered the Beatles coming to Washington, and he covered Watergate and Martin Luther King's assassination. and all sorts. So he brought that news home every night to the dinner table. But for me, as Rosie had a hard time introducing me because I am American. I mean, you can hear how American I sound. But I left America at age 22, and I moved to London, and I've been here ever since, and I'm now 59, so you can do the maths. I have been here a lot longer, and yet, so I'm not entirely American, but I'm not entirely British either. I'm something in the middle. And a little raft in the middle of the Atlantic, that's me sitting on it, thinking, where am I? But I think that it was moving to a foreign country that made me the writer I am, because I'm not entirely sure I would have become a writer if I'd stayed in the States. Whereas here, for the longest time, I felt on the outside. Like watching a game, like a football game, and you're on the sideline watching, you're not playing the game. And all of my books up until 2013 so my first 5 or 6 books were all set in European countries, whether it's Holland or England or France or Switzerland. And it's almost as if because I was American, I was looking to be the outsider in these cultures, and I could be more objective maybe. Maybe I could see the game more objectively than if I'm in the middle playing it. It was only after I'd been here for a long time then that I felt that America became foreign enough for me to write about it. So I finally did write a series of 3 novels that are all set in the States, but it was only after living here for many years. So there's an odd feeling of needing to be the outsider. So I am always slightly, I'm not one thing or another. And this has kind of been a thread through my life. But I think it's made me the writer I am.
Joanna, I know that you will be very interested in what Tracy has just said, and from what I can tell from your writing, because not everything has been translated, of course, you've written a lot, novels and non-fiction, that what I have read in English shows that you've always travelled as well. You've not necessarily left Romania, but you've travelled across different times in Romania. You've written novels set in a different time period before communism. And you have a very great gift, I think, to escape. And I wonder whether that was your own personal form of travel.
Of escaping, maybe. I always tell the slogan of my editing house, that is, you have as many lives as books you read. Actually, for a writer, he has as many lives, it's clear, he has as many lives as book, as novels he writes. Of course, Tracy has more life than myself. I have only 4. I have 4 novels, so 4 lives. She has more than 10. I don't know. Maybe.
But you've written non-fiction as well, and Tracy's
yes,
focused on...
Joanna, this is not a competition.
Yeah, it's not a competition.
Numbers are meaningless.
No, I put it that way, but of course it's not a competition. I read a lot, so if you have as many lives as book you read, then maybe it's more. But yes, it's a way to escape reality and to experience other lives, and also other tragedies, other form of joy, different feelings that you cannot have in your own life. You cannot have everything. you are limited by many things. So through books, you have a lot of possibilities, and that's wonderful about books.
Joanna, I remember...
I'm traveling through the time.
You are a time traveller. I know you've often said that about the way you write. You are a literary time traveller. And you've also said that your literary life began after 1989, after the collapse of communism, after Ceausescu was murdered, after the horrors of communism were exposed to the rest of the world. And even though 30 years more have passed, for your generation, it was still a terrible time, and you remember it.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about when your literary life began and why it began.
Yes, but before that, I would like to confirm your impression. Yes, I grew up during the communism, and it was bad. Of course, in my childhood, I couldn't realize that, but after, during my mid-20s, let's say, it was terrible, and I was aware that if something will not change, it will be worse and worse. And a few years ago, I had dinner with some people from different countries, and near me was a nice English gentleman, and after drinking a glass of red wine, he relaxed and he asked me something like that: between you and me, was communism so bad? You know, it's like asking a German, between you and me, was the Hitler period so bad? It's almost the same. And I said, yes, it was so bad, even worse than you can imagine. And I began to tell him a lot of stories about the daily life. And I hope I convinced him, because these stories had so much absurd tragedies, but also, in a way, funny things. I mean, something like in comedies, tragic comedies, that he understood what kind of life we had during the communism time. And I had this feeling that these stories must be put in a book, and I asked to many people, about 100 people, to tell me some short stories about that. I know, Rosie, I showed you this book, but I want to show it also for the others, for Tracy and for the others. The title is I Lived Too During the Communism, and it's everything about the daily life, not the big tragedies, not the prisons, not the torture, but the daily life. And yes, I couldn't publish before the 90s. It was impossible for me. I was not in the Communist Party. I couldn't. I had no possibilities for publishing. But after the 90s, my life began, my whole life, I would say, because I could do what I was able to do. Before I couldn't do that. I had to do, but during the communist period, we could read a lot and discuss a lot about books. And that was good. And also, during that time, I began to understand the value of freedom and the value of being honest, because you had to lie, you had always to tell lies before. And after the 90s, I said to myself, I will never say something that is not what I think, because I want to be honest with me and with the other people, with other people. So, so I began to write and to publish, and everything has begun in the 90s for me, yes.
What a story. Now, let's talk about some of the topics, the ideas you've introduced there, Joanna, as well, which is you've written about ordinary lives, and that is something that you and Tracy have in common. You both write historical fiction, that's what you have in common, and you write about ordinary lives to a large degree, the ordinary person in the middle of history. And I wonder whether Tracy can talk a little bit about your approach to writing, because across all your books, that's obviously what you're doing. And I wonder when you came upon that as something that you knew you wanted to do.
I love that question because it makes it sound like I have this grand plan for my writing. Here's what I'm going to do, and here's what students can write about when they want to write these pieces, essays about my books. But I just feel my way forward like a blind person a little bit. It's only retrospectively that I sort of understand, oh yes, I am writing about the model rather than the painter. I am writing about a fossil hunter who gets no credit whatsoever. I am writing about the weavers of tapestries rather than the people who own them. It is stories of everyday life, of what it's like to live at certain times, but with a special subject elevated, whether it's painting or fossil hunting or grafting apples, growing apple trees, or whatever. I focus on the makers, really, often. And
what fascinated you about the makers? Because that is something from the very beginning. That, because your first novel was 1997, Virgin Blue.
Yeah.
That was, and Girl with the Pearl Earring was the second novel.
Mm-hmm.
Are you a maker?
I am now. I often do the research for the book, and I'll make something. So, for instance, my latest novel, A Single Thread, is about embroidered cushions and kneelers in Winchester Cathedral, made by a group of volunteer women in the 1930s. And in order to be able to write about it accurately, I made the embroidery myself. And this is, if anybody's read the book, Violet Speedwell, Speedwell, the main character, makes a spectacles case for her mother for her birthday, and this is the case, which I made and then wrote the scene.
You give such detail, in fact, in your books of how to make these things. I always feel I can make them immediately afterwards.
I mean, I think that these are what we do in everyday life, and particularly not so much now because everything's manufactured, but our ancestors made everything, and we forget that. And I think that's a huge part of the past, and it's an important part as well. So I like to kind of bring it out in books in any way I can. And also I get a big kick out of making too. And I don't ever do it very well. I did a painting class when I wrote Girl with the Pearl Earring, and I was absolutely terrible at it.
So you can't paint like Vermeer.
But it made me understand what he was doing and how hard it was, and the different processes and what mistakes you make. And that's been the case all the way through. But it's a kind of, I think I'm trying to do in books what Vermeer did in his paintings, which is, if you think about all of his paintings, not just Girl with the Pearl Earring, they are mainly a woman on her own performing a domestic task, whether it's pouring milk or writing a letter or putting a necklace on. And he, by focusing intently on it, he elevates the ordinary into something that's special and extraordinary. And that's what I do in books as well. Joanna, I don't know if that's what you do as well with your everyday life characters.
And Joanna, I know that you've read most of Tracy's novels, and you have a bookshelf with her novels on them, because you've told me about that before. And I wonder if you could tell us why you love Tracy's novels so much, what it is you love about them.
Yes, you know, my memory is not so great, but I do remember how I met for the first time a book from Tracy Chevalier. I like also her name, Tracy Chevalier.
We like your name too.
Well, thank my father for Chevalier. That's his.
It was in a bookshop. I was in a bookshop. I love bookshops. I feel at home in bookshops. And it was this woman who talked to a friend of hers and said something like, you know, it's the 10th time that I buy this book, because I gave this book to all my friends. And I'm always attentive to what readers are recommending. So I saw the title. It was of course The Lady with the Pearl Earring, and I bought it without knowing anything about Tracy. And I liked it so much that I did the same as that lady, that unknown lady. I bought it and bought it again, and it was a gift for all my friends, so that I don't have it now in my bookshelves, because probably...
Nor do I, actually. I think a lot of people could tell that story.
But I have many others from the first edition from Tracy. For example, The Lady and the Unicorn, Falling Angels, Remarkable Creatures, Virgin Blue, The Virgin Blue, then that is translated in another name, Burning Bright, and of course The New Boy, that was published in the publishing house where I also published, and that I launched. And I remember I was so amazed by the brilliant idea of Tracy to put Othello's story in a school in the 70 years in America.
This is The New Boy, of course, yes.
Yes, The New Boy, Shakespeare recreated. And I launched this book. I love it very much. And now, because I knew that I will meet Tracy, I read my first novel, her first novel, in English, a single thread, but I have also the Romanian translation.
I think there's a fan. This is amazing.
And I have to say it's a very good translation. It's always a problem, and she's lucky to have a very good translator.
What is the name of the translator, Ioana?
Vali Florescu.
I'm really glad to hear that because I don't read
for
Romanian, so
for
good to
both,
know.
for the new boy and for this one, not others. So I read the single thread when I went to Brașov in train, and I read it from the beginning until I arrived to Brașov, and it was a boy near me, and he had a thick book, and I always trying to read the title of the books that people are reading during the traveling, and the title was "Everything is Fucked." Pardon my French. Everything is fucked. A book about hope. But he put it down in 5 minutes, so I wanted to recommend him a novel that he could read more than 5 minutes.
And did you give him a copy of Girl with a Pearl Earring?
Anyway, I like in Tracy's writing the very vivid characters. The feminine character are very, very vivid, and you could meet them. You have the impression you could meet them any moment. And she has also a full knowledge of the topic she chose. So that's also very important, because I have to say I read, for example, a book about Klimt's Kiss. It's called Klimt's Kiss. It's an American writer. And that was without any knowledge from this period of time, from Belle Epoque. She wrote some stupid things that were not in that period of time.
Well, this is, Ioana, this is a good opportunity for me, just while we're sorting out the image as well. It's a good opportunity to ask Tracy, in fact, how you research, because your research, you are very well known for your research, and I'm, wonder, do you ever get it wrong? Does anybody ever write to you and say, well, that's not exactly what that stitch is called?
I get it wrong all the time.
Do you?
Yes.
However much research you do.
Littered with little things, and in fact, I just the other day got a letter from somebody saying, I really enjoyed a single thread, but you should know that irises, flowers, are actually rhizomes, little roots, not bulbs, as you have put in your book. And I thought, oh, how could I have got that wrong? Of course I know that. And it's usually little things like that. In one of my books, I used the word mauve for a color. And the book is set in the early 19th century, and the word was not invented, and the color was not invented until 1856. So I found that out afterwards. So there's all kinds of things like that, but it's really hard.
But how much of your time do you spend researching before you?
Enormous amount of time. Before I probably research at least 6 months, and sometimes up to a year before I even start writing. And then once I start writing, that throws up all kinds of questions that I'm still researching. So I'm researching all the way through, but that first big chunk of research is to try to get myself familiar with the time, whether it's with a specific topic, if it's fossils or redwood trees or Dutch art, I learn everything I can about it, everything about the period, and possibly most importantly, everything about what it's like to live at that time. So that I build up a picture of what people ate, when they ate, what kind of table they sat at, what kind of clothes they wore, what it would have smelled like, how they cleaned the houses, how they shopped, all those things. And
why did you start writing though? When you needed to do so much, so it's quite unusual.
Oh, I know. I didn't realize it's going to be so hard. My very first novel, The Virgin Blue, is two sections. One's contemporary, about an American woman who starts researching her French family background. And then I decided to intersperse it with little historical tableaus of her descent, her relatives from the 16th century. And I started writing those and discovered, as hard as it was, because I had to research every single detail, it got me away from myself. You know, we read to escape ourselves and our lives, and we write, I don't know if you do, Johanna, but I write to escape my daily life. I don't really want to write about contemporary life. I'm living it already. Who wants to write about that? And I'm not somebody who writes autobiographically either. I find the whole autofiction trend just astonishing, that anyone would think they're that important, that they want to write about themselves in great graphic detail. So I write, I like to make that bridge to the past, but in order to do it properly, I need to get you to believe that I know I can create this world for you and it's accurate. So in order to do that, I have to research a lot, and I don't show it all, because if you show it, then you're just showing off. You just have to know it, and then
the characters have to have
confidence in me that I know what I'm talking about. And most of the time I do know what I'm talking about, except when it comes to iris bulbs versus rhizomes and mauve and little things like that. But mainly I do know, and that gives the reader confidence to follow me into that world.
Johanna's nodding as well, and it is about being able to believe. And both Johanna and I've just finished a single thread, and I can tell you exactly what Violet Speedwell was eating, and how poor she was, and she had 2 cardigans, I think, or 2 jackets. One was a beige colour, and the other, I can't remember the exact.
The other was brown.
And the other was brown. So the amount of detail is quite extraordinary. And I wonder also, while we're on a single thread, because I know Johanna will be interested in this as well, what came first, whether the character came first or the idea of these kneelers. Did you see a kneeler, or did the time period come first? Because it's set in 1932.
Yeah.
Which is...
what came first is that I wanted to write a novel about a cathedral, some cathedral, because I love cathedrals. I've always felt they bring together the history of a city, and they also, when I go into them, I'm not particularly religious, but I like the feeling that I have of being in a place that's not only literally but figuratively bigger than myself. So it makes me step outside of my own life for a little while. And I started looking into what cathedral I could write about, and Winchester Cathedral has wonderful stories attached to it, and Jane Austen's buried there. So I went to have a look around, thinking I was going to write about different things, and then I saw these cushions and kneelers in the choir stalls, and I read about them, and it said that they had been made by a group of volunteer women in the 1930s. And I just suddenly thought, I want to be in that volunteer group. I want to write about them. And it was only afterwards that I kind of realized, actually, what I've done is I've chosen the one thing in that cathedral that is actually made by women. Everything else is made by men. Stained glass, sculpture, the building itself was all designed and made by men, but we know that those cushions were made by women. And that's what drew me. I'm always particularly interested in women's stories, because for so long our stories have not been told. And particularly since we, until recently, lacked socioeconomic and political power. And so when you don't have the power, your stories are not the ones that get made into history. So I wanted to, in a small way, rectify that, to start filling in some blanks. That's why Girl with the Pearl Earring, everybody's written a lot about Vermeer, nobody's written about her. So I wanted to tell the story from her point of view.
And the beauty of that particular time period, 1932, is this period between the First and Second World War, when this whole lost generation of men, 2 million, apparently England or the UK was 2 million men short for the women. So the women were called the surplus generation. And there were these women like Violet, who were 38, I think she was, and she had lost her fiancé during the First World War, and her brother, and so on. So there was that whole lost generation. It's an incredibly poignant, difficult time for women too, because and Violet embodies that.
Well, it's a women who don't marry have been denigrated for so long, and actually continue to be, but less so than in the past. But certainly in the 1930s, they were seen as a problem, and expected, very few occupations that were open to them. The higher education was difficult to get into. They were expected to look after their elderly parents, live at home. And I just thought, I want to write about a woman who's surplus woman, but actually manages to break out and make an independent, satisfying life for herself. And she does it with the help of embroidery. Who would have ever guessed? So it brings a lot of different things together.
Well, a lot of us who do art and crafts and so on absolutely understand that community, I think. Joanna, to bring you in at this stage, I think it's a really good time to talk about the research for Life Begins on Friday, because you also had to do a lot of research into an historical period which you don't know about, and it is a wonderful era in Romanian history. In fact, at the end of the 19th century, when Romania was Bucharest was one of the most beautiful cities in Europe, the Paris of Eastern Europe, as it was. And I wonder what that period, what attracted to you to that period, and how the research was for you.
Yes, before writing this novel, I researched a lot. So I can say, even now, I know better that period of time than ours, than the present. I know exactly what they did, which were their customs. I even tried a dress and a dress from that period of time to experience how a woman felt her dress and the hats and everything. And it was not so difficult as we imagine today. I read diaries, I read letters, a lot of letters. I think people from that, around the 1900s, people wrote wonderful letters. It was something that they could do even if they don't had gifts for writing, but they had feelings. So letters, I think thousands of them, newspapers, magazines, whatever, novels, of course, from that period of time, poetry, everything. I really believe that I knew this period of time very well when I began to write Life Begins on Friday, and it was not at all difficult for me to imagine things. But I would like to come back a little bit to a single thread and ask Tracy, if you allowed me, Rosie, about the happy end she did at this novel.
Just don't give anything away for anybody who hasn't read it, please.
We call them spoilers, Joanna.
Don't do that.
But you mean about what about?
It's not the happy end you could imagine, so I don't spoil anything. It's a kind of happy end.
Maybe I can ask a question to both of you, which is a similar question, really, which is why you both feel and how you both manage to write such positive novels, because they are, however difficult the time periods are that you're describing, there is usually some transformation or positive change. And Joanna, you write also about great beauty. There's a lot of hope in your novels, I think. Is that a fair enough question to ask you both?
Yes.
Maybe Tracy first, then.
Yes. I firmly believe, and maybe this is an old-fashioned belief, that the main character, or somebody, has to go on a journey, a psychological journey through a novel, and they come out of it transformed in some way, because otherwise it's not really a story. And I think that every novel is or should be a journey. And so most of the time a transformation is a positive thing. I'm not sure I could write about a negative. I mean, I do write sad. I don't tend to write funny that much, but I write sad quite a lot. And my ending, Single Thread's ending may be happy, but it's a really, really qualified happiness. And apart from anything else, we the readers have the knowledge that World War II is coming up in 5 years. So who knows what's going to happen to these characters after that.
We certainly hear enough about the build-up of Nazism in Germany in a Single Thread.
But I do think that it's important for me to follow that journey. I don't mind if main characters in novels are not likable. I don't think you always have to write likable, but I want the reader to care about what that journey is going to be.
Joanna, your characters are likable. I mean, I'm thinking of Anna in The Innocent, and who's the child, of course, which is your autobiographical novel. And I'm also thinking of Dan in Life Begins on Friday. They're positive, they're good characters. And I also think that possibly in a more determined way, you also seek out beauty.
Maybe because I grew up between beautiful people. I don't know.
But in a difficult country, though, and
yes,
in difficult times.
And maybe exactly that's why I noticed the people who are so extraordinary. But I think I would like a writer that I will not name because I don't want to compare myself with this writer, but I would like that people think of my novels that they are celebrating life, even if my novels know very well death. And in the book that I wrote about my childhood in Brasov, somebody somebody noticed that in each chapter somebody or something dies. A house, a dog, a father, and so on. I was amazed because I did not on purpose that. So yes, I celebrate life in my books. I try to celebrate life in my books.
Joanna, tell us what you're writing now.
Now, nothing. I have.
That's most unusual for you, I think.
I have a novel in my mind, but I didn't begin it. But my last novel, not my last, I hope, my most recent novel is about the Prophet Jonah. I can tell you about that if you want.
And this is the book, The Prophecy, that's coming out next year in English.
It's a story about a man, the prophet Jonah, told by a lot of women. The story passes from mouth to mouth. It's the first storyteller is the daughter of Jonah, and the last one is the mother of some twins in the present, nowadays. The first part is taking place in the village, the village of Jonah. Then, of course, it's the second part named the Tempest on the ship and inside the whale. And the third part is in the Nineveh, in the city of in Nineveh, and it has some echoes from 1001 Nights. It's in a kind like that, but it's adventurous. It's full of life, I hope, and it has also a deeper level questions about life and death that are.
You are, Joanna, I think, a very profound thinker and writer, but you write with a very humorous and light touch. You are quite funny sometimes. Tracy says she doesn't write funny novels or doesn't really attempt humour, but you do. You do like to write with a humorous touch.
Humor was for us a weapon and also a therapy during the communism. We couldn't survive without humor. So I think that's wonderful to keep this weapon. And laughing, I like laughing. I like it very much. And I'm grateful if somebody makes me laugh.
We'll have to think of a joke to tell you at the end. If somebody can come up with a joke.
Not always. Jokes are sometimes difficult to understand. But anyway, I like laughing. So I try to put, I'm not aware that I do that, but I think sometimes in my novels it's a little bit humor.
Definitely. And Tracy, your novel that you're working on at the moment, I know it's been stymied somewhat by not being able to travel, but tell us about your current work.
Well, readers often suggest topics to me, and that's not usually how I choose what I'm going to write about. Usually something sort of hits me over the head and I think, oh, I've got to write about that. So I see a painting, or I go into a cathedral and see some cushions, or I walk around a cemetery and say, I've got to set a novel here. But about 10 years ago, I was doing an event in Milan, and a man came up to me at the end of the reading and said, you should write about Venetian glass trade beads, because they were used all over the world and they have great stories attached to them. Here's a couple of books about them. And I thought, what? But I looked that night in the hotel, I sort of looked through the books and I thought, oh, it's interesting, very beautiful. But I put it at the back of my mind, and that was years ago. And then more recently, my last books were set in Ohio, in cornfields, and in Winchester, and my husband said, do you think you could set a novel someplace we actually want to go to a lot instead of Ohio? And I said, how about Venice? And he's like, yes, we go to Venice every 2 years for the Biennale. We've always loved it, and I thought I'd love to get to know it better and spend more time there. What a great excuse. But I was a little worried because everybody's written about Venice, and but not that many people have written about glass. So most of it is set on Murano, on the glass island just off of Venice. And it's a big old family saga, and it starts in the 15th century and it goes all the way up to the 21st century. So it's longer than I usually write. I haven't written a book actually set in a non-English speaking country for a long time, and so that's a big thing for me. I knew nothing about glass, so I had a lot of learning, a lot of research to do. And I did quite a lot of it, and I was in Venice in January 2020, researching, and then when the pandemic hit, I was writing. And I've written about 2/3 of it, but I don't know about you, but I found my rhythm of my life got really disrupted by lockdowns, by the anxiety in the world, and I forgive myself for writing slowly and not writing very well. And I know there are some writers who have taken advantage of the quote-unquote extra time and have written novels or books, and I'm not one of them. I've written some, and but I was desperate to get back to Venice, and I finally did this past September, and it was like my well had run dry and it filled right back up just for a week. It was fantastic being there, and that has helped. So I'm a little behind. Because, you can do a lot of research on Google and in books and all that stuff, but it's not the same as being there. And also, I've had to learn, I'm trying to learn how to blow glass. And
I was going to ask you whether you, I was pretty sure that you would have.
Of course I did, of course I am. And, but a lot of that got canceled, so I'd been waiting or postponed until I could do that again. So actually a couple of weeks ago in Bermondsey, I did a glass blowing session and made a couple of things, and I've made some beads, and terrible, they look awful, but I'm learning, and so the publication of it is a bit pushed forward, but that's okay. Life goes on, and it's an easy, I am incredibly lucky to have had to have a job that didn't get affected by the pandemic in a way. I mean, I work from home anyway, so it wasn't that big a deal, and our son's grown up, so we have enough space, and we were lucky. We were lucky in so many ways. So I'm not complaining, but I think it's just, for everyone, it's rattled us all. And so I'm trying to get myself back into the right rhythm. And the rhythm, I don't know about you, Johanna, but for me, the best writing happens when I have the same, clear days, day after day, where I just write, I keep pushing it forward a little bit, and I don't stop. And this past year and a half, I've been stopping too much. So I need to get back into the rhythm of having a kind of boring life. And that, it's coming back slowly.
So we have to wish you a happy, boring life.
Yes,
for the next few months. Joanna, finally for you, can you tell us a little bit about how your working life has been during the pandemic, because you've continued to teach Romanian literature at Bucharest University, and you said you're not writing very much at the moment, but you did produce the book on which you showed us previously, on ordinary lives under communism. So you have been extremely busy. How has this time been for you?
I'm writing always in the morning because after that I have a lot of work to do, and I'm writing during the summer and the early autumn, when I have more time. So it's holiday and I can use this time. But normally I have not much time for writing, but I have time for thinking. I said I commute to Brasov, and when I'm sitting on the train and I'm not reading, I think over and over what could I write, or if I have a novel in my head, then I write in my head certain scenes, and after that, when I have time, then I put it on the paper.
And what about this time of the pandemic? Has this been a difficult time for you?
Yes and no. Anyway, I noticed that literature was a winner in during this time. Literature never disappointed me, never. Books, yes, some books, some authors disappointed me, but never literature. I think it's the winner, and during the pandemic, literature showed its power. It's something that has, I believe, the most generous expiry date, like wine or like honey, I don't know. So during the pandemic I read a lot, and it was wonderful. But I have to say I had enough of the pandemics. For example, our meeting today is so strange. I'm in my own room, or if you want, in a room of my own. You are there on the scene. I cannot see you. I hear you, but not perfectly. So that's because of the pandemic. I very hope that in the future we will meet normally, and we will see each other, and we will hear better what we say. As I say, I had it enough. I hate now the pandemics, and I want normal life.
Me too, Johanna. I hope we meet in person.
And I couldn't say more heartily than that. I agree with you both, and also I want to thank you both so much, because I know we couldn't be together. And Johanna, I long to see you again in person as well. It's been far too long, and I miss all my Romanian friends. I have to get some more Romanian blouses. I'm running out, and we have to get Tracy wearing a few. Mind you, tomorrow evening, you must tune in for our final event of the festival tomorrow evening. Tracy Chevalier is going to be with us again, and she's going to wear her one Romanian blouse. So, Ioana, thank you so much for tonight, Ioana Pavlescu in Bucharest, and you've been wonderful. And as always, a great pleasure to talk to you. And I'm so glad you met Tracy for the first time, because I know you admire her very much. And I really hope that you will both meet in real person. And Tracy Chevalier, thank you very, very much from all of us here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Well, if anybody has any questions they want to ask Tracy, feel free now. We've stopped the live streaming, but if you have any books that you want signed or whatever, we can do that as well. But as I say, if you want to join us tomorrow evening, it'll be a real celebration, because we've got 5 other women as well, and some really, really well-known Romanian writers, more well-known Romanian writers, all women. So it's going to be very, very indulgent, but why not? We've been quiet for too long, so I think our time has come. So thanks again, Tracy, very much indeed. And yeah, I think that's it. If nobody's got any questions?
Yeah, I have one.
Great.
Yay!
Okay.
So I know Ioana Puvrescu writes 2 volumes of poetry. What's your relationship with poetry? Have you tried? Or
So Ioana, let me just repeat the question for Ioana. This is not part of the film, by the way, but I want to make sure Ioana can hear it.
I couldn't hear.
No, I'll just repeat it. It's for a question for Tracy, actually, because